The best coaches in the game, we really ain't playing. We regroup up in the Slack chat where the coaches debrief. We be piecing these puzzles, occupy the chunk of the pie. Ain't no lie when we hit the block, helmet's casket is top. You be seeing helmet after helmet, helmet after helmet. First place, second place, fifth place, eighth place, 12th place, 15, 16, 20. So many helmets, you got blurred vision, we got too many. Take your tech. Oh man, shit. They got us fucked up. Army, regroup. We pledge always to have that edge. We don't fire warning shots. Competition just dropped. We locked and loaded before lock. Whatever the time, yeah. Do you even correlate?
Being the best requires a willingness to outwork your competition. There's always someone smarter, faster, sharper, more naturally gifted to come around.
Welcome back, DFS Army. This is Fantasy Fling looking at Week 5 DFS main slate over on Yahoo. Welcome back. Let's take a look. All right, so let's go ahead and head over to the Sharp app as we look at the game totals for Week 5. So, you know, kind of as we saw in Week 4, really only takes one game to just go crazy and break a slate, even if it's low scoring overall across the slate. You get that one game to shoot off for 90-plus points. That's how you win a large field GPP. And certainly if you had TJ Hawkinson in cash or Josh Jacobs, you cashed last week. So that's kind of how it goes. So we're going to take a look at the game totals and try to identify some games we like. Obviously, you know, we start off with the Thursday night game, and nobody does the showdowns better than the DFS Army. So if you are watching this and you play DFS, you need to watch DFS Army showdown breakdowns. Geek leading from the front took down a showdown last week. We had multiple showdown takedowns on Monday night. So it was awesome end to Week 4 for the NFL DFS. So definitely check out the showdowns. As I believe they will be recording that tonight, and it should definitely be ready before tomorrow, before the Broncos and Indy game. So as we look at the totals, we have Tennessee and Washington. First off, the low game total, 42.5. Don't really like a whole lot of this. Derrick Henry is always in consideration, specifically with Treylon Burks being out. You got to think Derrick Henry is probably in line to get even more touches. I do like Robert Woods this week is really the only pass catcher that they have. You know, they have Westbrook-Akine and whatnot and Swain and I believe Hooper. So they have some options, but Derrick Henry is probably where you're going to be looking the most. And then, you know, if you do want to value play, we will get into Robert Woods is a guy that I like this week. On the Washington side, Gibson, not so much. This Brian Robinson might be playing this week, so I don't want any of Gibson at all. Brian Robinson is a guy that I would like in GPPs, large field GPPs, like, you know, a small, very small exposure. But, you know, if you're looking for just a one-off who's really low owned and probably pretty cheap, he could be a guy that you would like maybe this week. But other than that, I don't really like it. If Jahan Dotson plays, I like some of him. He's low priced, but not a lot to like from that game. Low game totals. Minnesota, Chicago. Now, if there's no David Montgomery, sure, we'll play Herbert again. You know, it wasn't that he did bad last week, but, you know, he certainly didn't smash you like you thought he would. But, yeah, with Montgomery, I don't like anyone on that side. If Montgomery's that, I would certainly like some Khalil Herbert. As far as Minnesota, Justin Jefferson obviously had a great week last week. And then Dalvin Cook, he's been getting a lot of carries. He's healthy. He really has had a lot of yards recently, as we'll get into that. He carries and yards. He just hasn't got the touchdowns, which is what we really like on Yahoo. But if you think he's due for some positive regression, he's in a great matchup against Chicago. Certainly Dalvin Cook's the guy that you'd be looking to play. Seattle and New Orleans. Seattle coming off that big game, big win against Detroit in that game that went off for 93 points. Geno is definitely pumping life into that offense more than we thought he would. Rashad Penny looks great. So New Orleans, they're pretty banged up. We don't know what's going to happen with them. Winston's might not play again. Michael Thomas might be out again. So Kamara is questionable as well. This game has a 46-point game total. So that offense, everybody's questionable, it seems like at this point. That said, Kamara, I do believe, is expected to play this week. And if he plays, I do love him against Seattle's rush defense, which has been quite poor. Chris Olave certainly would have some consideration for him, definitely in tournaments. As far as Atlanta and Tampa Bay, this is one of the more high-scoring games on the slate, and I actually like this game from several angles, specifically on Tampa Bay side. We don't know what's going on with Brady. He's getting a divorce. His thumb or his fingers are hurting him. His shoulder's hurting him. But he got Godwin back. Obviously, he has Mike Evans. He has Fournette. Rashad White was getting involved last week. So on this side, I really do like Tampa Bay in team stacks this week. Obviously, there is some cash consideration for guys like Fournette and Mike Evans, but specifically in tournaments, I do like that. Cordarrelle Patterson is out for Atlanta. He's on IR. Algier or Huntley, it's hard to say who's going to get the bulk of the carries if either of them are really playable. Outside that, I think Pitts is questionable, and then Drake London, he might be a wide receiver play. But other than that, Atlanta's pretty banged up, and there's not a lot to like there. So the Chargers got going last week. They got Cleveland this week. This is a pretty high game total for this slate. So 47.5. It's tough to say. If I don't really like the offense as far as passing goes, outside of Herbert. If Keenan Allen is in, if he's out, then Mike Williams, Everett, Palmer, those are some cheaper options. And of course, Eckler looked great last week. He finally got going. So this game has a 47.5 point total, and Los Angeles is favored. So you certainly like favored teams running back. So Eckler would have some consideration for me. The one game that I do like that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, and this is a game that I can see just going off, right? You got Hurts versus Murray. Arizona does not have a good pass defense. So Philly, on the other hand, does. And don't get me wrong, in cash games, I don't want any part of Arizona's passing offense. Going against Darius Slay and Bradbury, Philly has a good secondary. That said, in GPPs, specifically if Philly is pushing the pace, I could see this game maybe going over the 49-point total. I mean, last week we had Seattle and Detroit, and that game was a 48-point total, and it went to 93. So crazier things have happened. If this game goes to 50, 60 points, would not be surprised at all. I love Hurts this week. He's probably going to be my cash game quarterback. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith at low ownership, and then Dallas Goedert for sure. So the other games we have, New York Giants and Green Bay. No, that's not. I believe that's not on the main slate. We do have Houston and Jacksonville. Now, I do like Dameon Pierce this week. Christian Kirk, I like him a little better now this week that he's not going against Darius Slay as he was last week versus Philly. Brandon Cooks had a fantastic week. James Robinson, for sure, in tournaments. They're at home. They're 7-point favorites. So this is exactly when you want to target the running back in a game against Houston. Now, Detroit and going against New England, the Patriots. Detroit, I'm not chasing it this week. They're actually favored to lose. If Almiron's back, I like it a little more. But everything that happened last week, that explosion, people are going to be looking all for that. I'm probably not this week. The other side, however, New England, I don't like the quarterbacks, but Detroit has a horrible run defense, as we saw on Penny ran wild last week. Kenneth Walker looked good. I like Damien Harris and Ramandre Stevenson. I had some consideration to play Damien Harris in cash. I probably won't get there. I won't go against anyone if they do. He is getting most of the carries, and he gets goal line carries. So in Yahoo, that's something that you definitely want. And Ramandre Stevenson is more of a tournament play for me. He gets a lot of the pass catching duties, and he outsnapped Damien Harris last week, but Damien Harris gets more of the goal line look. So Ramandre Stevenson is more playable on a site like DraftKings, I think. A lot more playable, but tournaments, you never know. I believe it's happened before where in, large field GPPs, we've actually had we've had weeks where both Damien Harris and Ramandre Stevenson have gone off. Of course, it's more on DraftKings, just from memory. But anyways, moving on. Miami and New York Jets. This game is a 45.5 point total. Miami is favorite. Teddy isn't bad. With a lot of playmakers, if you're not asking him to do much, now I'm a Broncos fan, so I've seen what Teddy is like for an entire season. He's not good. I believe he had like 18 touchdowns and like 7 interceptions or something like that. So he's not going to get you a lot of fantasy points is what I'm getting at. He won't screw it up, but he's not going to win you the game either. Do you like Tyreek? I don't know. I more so would rather play Raheem Mostert in this game as a cheap option going against the Jets, who have a poor run defense. On the Jets side, I don't really like anybody. Now, the game that I really like from a team stacking perspective is Buffalo. This is crazy, right? 14-point spread, 46.5 total. This was 49. It's come down, but yeah, 14-point spread. So they have quite a high team total, almost 50 points for Buffalo. This is a game I could potentially see myself. I certainly would like Diggs in this game. Josh Allen, I wouldn't be opposed to playing Josh Allen. The lineup that I was looking at earlier, I'll probably go with Hurts, but I'm not going to wrong anyone for playing Josh Allen. He's very safe. I might change things up and still end up there if we're being honest. And then Singletary is a guy that I would not like in cash games just because he's not getting enough carries. That said, I think he's a strong tournament play this week. They're heavy favorites. You like that kind of variance. He could end up getting, he's been getting a lot of targets, but he can end up getting a lot more carries, specifically if they're just blowing him out. So Singletary is certainly a guy in tournaments that I like. San Francisco and Carolina. On the Carolina side, I want nothing. On San Francisco side, I like Jimmy G with Debo. I didn't really like him with Trey Lance because you never know with Trey Lance. He's going to run. He's going to take away carries from Debo. But Jimmy G and Debo's back to being elite. So that is really probably the only guy I want to play on the San Francisco side. And Jeff Wilson, I certainly have consideration for him in cash games as well. They're 6.5 point favorites. Wilson, he's getting carries, a lot of carries. He looks good. And then last game, we have Dallas and the Rams rounding it out. Low total, 43.5. The Rams, they got smoked. It was a good defense. We're not going to take a ton from it. I like Higbee this week at tight end. He's been getting a lot of targets for a tight end. And specifically this week, if you got Kupp, who's $40 on Yahoo, and if Trayvon Diggs is going to be covering him a lot, I like Higbee to continue to get more targets. And, I do think if he does, a touchdown is coming. He is scoring quite a bit of points for a tight end. So that is going to do it for the game totals. Now, a couple things I want to look at here. Some of the guys that I have kind of zeroed in on. And my article that I write every week for DFS Army will come out tomorrow. We do not have the ownership projections, and the defense is just kind of a little buggy. We're still working out some of the kinks with the domination station with Yahoo specifically. So this will be out tomorrow. I want to make sure ownership projections are key, specifically when I'm looking at leverage plays and tournament stacks. So once those are out, I will have this finished, and this will be out on DFS Army. That said, again, I mentioned Josh Allen. He's 24 plus points. He has not scored less than 24 points this week with his rushing floor, and we know his ceiling is over 30 points. So he's $40. He's the top pay up option, rightfully so. They're 14-point favorites, but he certainly has been known to flex on teams, even when they're winning and they continue to throw it. He continues to run. So I like Josh Allen this week. And really, if I could find another $2 in salary, I would get up to him. Jalen Hurts last week was not his best game, but he's going against Arizona's 17th ranked defense. This is a 49-point game total. Eagles 27-point team total. He's the second highest projected quarterback at DFS Army with a projection of almost 24 points. So I certainly love that this week. Now, running backs, if you read the running back list from last week, which I pretty much said Khalil Herbert, Jamal Williams, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs. Those are my top 4 plays. you probably did well last week, both in cash and in tournaments. So running backs, that was pretty easy. It was it was spelled out for us last week. The writing was on the wall. So this week it's a little different. So we're going to navigate this a little differently. And, we're going to give you several options. So Cook is getting a lot of volume. Dalvin Cook, 85 yards a game, full workload last week. He faces a Bear defense that's giving up 5 yards per carry. So I like him this week based on the matchup and other options in that $30 range. The Christian McCaffreys and the Henrys, I would prefer to play Cook at $29 versus paying over $30 for a running back. So the other guy, like I talked about it, is Kamara. Recency bias can be something where we don't notice a good play because we haven't seen them in a couple weeks because they've been injured, right? So there's not a lot of other options. They really need the offense to go through someone this week, specifically if Michael Thomas is out. And Kamara is one of the top plays from fantasy points per dollar. Seahawks are giving up the 4th most points to opposing running backs. So if he plays, I like him. He's projected for over 16 fantasy points and 0.69 fantasy points per dollar. Damien Harris, I mentioned, I like him, but he is in a timeshare, so it's a little bit of a worry. So the other Damien, I actually prefer better. He checks a lot of boxes on Yahoo. Number 1 being volume, 2 being production. He's getting a lot of volume, so 17 carries over the last 2 games. He's at 105 yards on average and a touchdown. So he's got a good matchup this week versus the Jags, and he's, from fantasy points per dollar standpoint, he is the 2nd highest back. So I certainly like him. I also like Jeff Wilson if you're looking to find a back in the teens. So as a pay down in a tough matchup last week, he still had 74 yards and a touchdown against the Rams. So he's got 18 carries in 2 of his last 3 games. I would prefer him as opposed to a Devin Singletary, who, yeah, the matchup looks great, but he's not getting enough carries. Jeff Wilson's averaging about 10 more carries a game. So I would prefer him over Singletary at $18 in cash games. Now, wide receivers, I mentioned Buffalo. When I look at the top price players, Kupp is $40. Stephon Diggs is $34. Kupp is going to be covered by Trayvon Diggs, Stephon Diggs' brother. Trayvon Diggs is not covering Stephon Diggs this week. So we don't have some brother on brother crime this week. He has a favorable matchup versus Pittsburgh with almost a 30-point team total. So he is at that $6 discount and 25% target share. He's also due for some positive regression. He's had a couple down games. I could certainly see him bouncing back this week. Another guy like A.J. Brown, his pricing is declined, and I like that because he still has a 32% target share and 100 yards per game. The touchdowns, I do believe, will come. In this week for the Cardinals pass defense, it's shaky. So I like this game. Debo, I mentioned him. I like Debo this week, $25. And then Brandon Cooks, he's $16. He's cheap. He's a top fantasy points per dollar play at DFS Army this week with a $16 salary. So he 26% target share. David Mills looks to Cooks every single time first. So I certainly like him. And their defense gives up a lot, really. So, they're going to be clawing back in games like they were against the Chargers last week. I like him. So as far as tight ends, there's a couple guys now. I said it. I don't like chasing prior week performances. Hawkinson is one of the highest projected tight ends on the slate, and he scores touchdowns. So we like that on Yahoo. Specifically, as we saw last week, if there's no Amron, I would play Hawkinson in cash games for sure. If Amron's back, I would prefer to play Higbee because he is the highest projected scoring tight end this week at DFS Army's domination station. His projection of 9 points, 25% target share on the season. As we talked about, if Trayvon Diggs is going to be covering Cooper Kupp, I certainly like that. Hunter Henry would be a complete punt. I'm not going there, but if you want to, I wouldn't hate it. Jonnu Smith, he's week to week with a sprained ankle. This leaves Hunter Henry. He had 20% target share. His scoring has been really low. So that's why I don't like it. It's a complete punt. But the volume is there and he's minimally priced. So if you're going to punt, this is definitely where I'd go. So defenses, we'll have to go to the domination station and we'll look over at FanDuel to kind of find some matchups. Because as I mentioned with DFS Army, the defenses aren't populating right now. And that's fine. You know, it's Wednesday. We're working out this stuff. But I'm not going to finish this write-up, obviously, until I get a better understanding of where that's going to be. As far as stacks, we need to know ownership projections. That said, a couple games that I'm really looking at, I'm looking at the Tampa Bay game going against Atlanta. I like team stacks of Brady and Evans. You could do Brady, Evans, and Godwin. I certainly like that. And then I like Jalen Hurts this week versus A.J. Brown and or Devonta Smith. So a little bit of salary relief. And I do think these might go a little under-owned relative to like Buffalo versus Pitt. So these are where I'm heading with stacks so far this week. But let's take a look at the domination station real quick. So as far as defenses, as I will show you, we'll go over to FanDuel because they do the same scoring. So we can get an idea of the projections. And then we can look over at Yahoo for defenses, by the way. So obviously Pittsburgh, ain't no way the Steelers have the highest projected D going against Buffalo. Ain't no way. But we have Philly against Arizona. That's a high one. Obviously, they're going to be overpriced. Let's see what we can find for fantasy points per dollar. I like the Chargers. Minnesota. All right, so let's take a look over at Yahoo real quick. We'll go to defense. Yeah, so Minnesota be $14. Now, New England could potentially be starting a third-string quarterback. So even though not a huge Detroit guy, variance, you just never know. They could end up having a good week. The Jets at Miami versus Teddy, I don't love it. New England, nah. Now, I do like this. So this would probably be where to go. Los Angeles Chargers at Cleveland. The Chargers, specifically, if they get their offense going, they're pushing the pace. You're making Brissett. If you can make the Browns play from behind with Brissett and them not leaning on Kareem Hunt and Chubb, which is exactly what they want to do, I actually really like that. So that would probably be where I would go at defense. And then let's just look over at the fantasy points per dollar and see who is actually popping over on Yahoo. So really what we're looking at right now is projections and fantasy points per dollar because we don't have total ownership at this point. But Josh Allen, I mean, it's on a Wednesday. It's still early when I record this podcast. So, you know, we get more clarity on this as the week goes on, which is why if you don't follow me on Twitter, give me a follow at FantasyFling on Twitter, as if there are questions that you have as we get closer to the weekend about who you like or who I like specifically on the main slate, who I like in cash games, who I like in small tournaments, and who I like in GPPs, certainly help you a little bit better with that on the weekend. So Josh Allen, obviously I mentioned him, the top play on the slate from a projection standpoint. He is coming in as the top play, and rightfully so, going against the Steelers. Again, he could definitely get 30 points in this game and be out by the third quarter and, you know, have the backup in. It's definitely out of the range of outcomes. Jalen Hurts, as we mentioned, he is also one he's probably where I'm going in cash this week. He's just behind Josh Allen. And this game is going to be a more competitive game. So I do think there's a little bit of a safer floor this week with Hurts. Specifically, for example, Buffalo, if their defense, Pickens, he got picked off. Kenny Pickett, I believe his name is, he got picked off like 3 times last week. He threw the ball like 13 times, got picked off like 3 times last week. So Buffalo's defense, if they just throttle this kid in his first start, Josh Allen may not get there. So that would be the safer play, I think. And then Tom Brady, as I mentioned, in tournaments, I like him. And really, he's quite a bit of salary relief from both Hurts and Josh Allen. And he has the stacking pieces back, so I like that. Plus, he's angry. He's getting a divorce. He wants to take out some frustration on somebody. Take it out on the Falcons. And, oh, by the way, 28-3, we know he owns the Falcons. He's got mind control over them. So I'm all about it this week with Brady as well. Yeah, that's probably going to do it for the quarterbacks. These are the 3 that I like in cash, and I'm not playing Brady in cash, but I love Brady in tournaments, and I like Hurts in cash and in tournaments as well. So running backs, when I look at the top projections, Fournette, I didn't like it last week. He just hasn't looked good for 2 weeks now. So we got to, he got receptions and he got a touchdown. That's awesome. But running the ball hasn't been there. As I mentioned, I like Kamara. I like Cook. If there's no Swift this week, I do like Jamal Williams, actually. Specifically, if the field's going to be on, if he's going to be chalky again, I'm certainly going to play him in cash games. Damien Harris, I like him a lot. And he just looks really good. He's the guy we thought he was going to be in preseason, rough start through the first game, but certainly looks a lot better. So yeah, this is fantasy points per dollar. And then as far as overall projections, you see Henry up there, always have consideration for him in tournaments. Eckler, as we talked about earlier as well. And then wide receivers. So the top guy obviously is Cooper Kupp, projected, but he's 40 points. So that is something, we have to think about from fantasy points per dollar. He's obviously not the top guy. He can vastly exceed that. He's had a pretty good start to the year, but it wasn't what we saw last year. And if it wasn't Trayvon Diggs, I would be more inclined to play Cooper Kupp in my cash games. But given the matchup, I do like Stephon Diggs a little bit better this week. I can see him vastly outperforming his 15-point projection, and he's cheaper. He comes at a discount. So I like my lineup overall better just with paying 34 for Kupp or Diggs as opposed to Kupp. Again, Justin Jefferson, I don't hate Justin Jefferson this week. I just like Dalvin Cook a little better, and you really have to make a decision. You can't play both of them unless you really want to go minimum at wide receiver and tight end, and probably a pay down at quarterback, and I just don't want to do that. So I mentioned Deebo Samuel, like him. He's right there with Diggs as far as projection, and he's about $9 cheaper. So he is coming in as one of the top fantasy points per dollar guys. I mentioned A.J. Brown. I like Christian Kirk better this week. The optimizer, when I was running some optimals earlier, Marquise Brown, he kept popping up in the lineup, so I like him a lot. And then, as I mentioned, if there's no Michael Thomas, but you have Chris Olave back and Winston, no Michael Thomas, but if you have Chris Olave and you have Winston, I do like him this week as well. So another guy, Tyler Lockett, he's $16. Now, if Marcus Lattimore is covering DK Metcalf, that opens up Tyler Lockett a lot. You have to think in terms of matchups, and yeah, that's why he's popping as one of the top fantasy points per dollar plays. So certainly would have him in my lineups. No comps about it. And then Brandon Cooks, as we mentioned, so he's the same price as Tyler Lockett, but he is the number one in that offense. And that's from fantasy points per dollar perspective, he's a top guy. So projected more points than Tyler Lockett as well. So certainly like him this week as well. And I think he probably will make his way into my cash game. And then another guy, actually, let's take a look. Now, George Pickens, I like him, as you'll see when I'm building my cash lineup, more so because when Pickett came in last week, George Pickens was getting a lot of targets, and he also is just an incredible, he's a stud. So with him being almost minimally priced and Pickett deciding he wanted to target in on Pickens, I certainly like him as an option this week. As far as tight ends, I kind of went over this a little bit. I like Higbee a lot at $15. I do think we can squeeze him into the lineup. Pat Freiermuth, he's a little cheaper. He's getting quite a few targets, but the touchdowns just aren't there. So I prefer Higbee this week. And then, as I mentioned, if you wanted to completely punt the position, Hunter Henry with Jonnu Smith being week to week with an ankle sprain, and Hunter Henry having a 20+% target share. Defense, we kind of went over that with FanDuel because these are the only two options currently, but we are more so looking at the Chargers. So let's go over to Yahoo, and I will kind of show you where I'm thinking in cash this week, as I was able to build a little bit of a lineup earlier. I think that has a lot of volume. It has a lot of floor, and I think there's just a lot of ways for this lineup to hit the cash line. Pretty low variance if Alvin Kamara plays. We got Hurts. We got Kamara. We got Cook. Yeah, let's look at his game log. So 15 attempts. The last time we saw him play. And I believe he left that game early. He got hurt. Dalvin Cook, as we talked about, he is getting the yardage. So outside of the game that he got hurt, he's had 90, 96, 76, one rush touchdown. I believe the positive regression will be there. The wide receiver, we can pay up for Diggs. We like him in that matchup, as we talked about. So last week was a bad week for Diggs. So stud coming off a dud. But before that, 11 targets, 15 targets, 9 targets. So, he's averaging over 10 targets a game. And, we know how incredibly explosive he is. 122 yards, 148 yards. Last 2 weeks were down weeks. So he's due. It's a good matchup going against Pittsburgh this week. Now, I mentioned Robert Woods just because without Treylon Burks, he's going to get a lot of the volume this week. He is a de facto number 1 at this point, and he's healthy. So we like Bobby Trees if he's playing. Now, when we mentioned Pickens, you see, he got 8 targets last week, but it's not so much how many he got the whole game. It's how many targets he got after Pickett came in the game, which he started targeting him like crazy. So at $12, almost at the minimum, if he gets 10 targets, which is easily what we can expect from him this week, I like that. And the reason being is it allows me to pay up for studs like Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Stephon Diggs, and Jalen Hurts. So if you can get a guy like Pickens who's $12, but it's going to see, 8 to 10 targets, I certainly like that. Garbage time works too. So as we mentioned, Higbee, $14 targets last week. So for tight ends, he gets a lot. He had 1 down game, but most weeks he's seeing over 10 targets. So no touchdowns yet, but they're coming. He's getting a lot of targets. And again, if Kupp is going to be covered by Trayvon Diggs, we certainly like that this week. He is the top fantasy points per dollar from what I remember. Actually, just top projected tight end. Yeah, 9 points. So he's a good play this week. And then the last guy we talked about was Damien Pierce. So over on Yahoo more so than on like DraftKings, we want guys who can score touchdowns. So we will play a running back in the flex who is getting the workload, the majority of the workload. Damien Pierce, Alvin Kamara, if he plays and he's healthy, he will certainly get that. So will Dalvin Cook. We like those guys. They're not going to be vultured at the goal line. Like if you're playing a DeAndre Swift, if he's healthy, who's going to get vultured by Jamal Williams. We want guys to score touchdowns. You get that with your stud running backs like Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and a low-priced Damien Pierce. And then obviously you got a lot of floor with Jalen Hurts. Same thing with Stephon Diggs. He gets touchdowns. He gets a ton of volume. And then these guys will be getting volume. So Higbee, as far as tight ends, he gets a ton of volume. And then we're expected to see a bump up in volume between these guys who are priced pretty low. And then we got the Chargers going against Cleveland. Again, fantasy points per dollar. It's pretty good play. The idea here is we like the Chargers to push the pace, score touchdowns, get Cleveland out of their game script a little bit, and force to throw the ball through the air, and the Chargers to obviously capitalize with some sacks and turnovers. So probably where we're going to cash this week. Again, follow me on Twitter at FantasyFling. If you would, if you have any questions as far as the main slate, once we get closer to it, Saturday, Sunday, and specifically as value changes and we get more idea of what the field is going to do, then we're going to eat more chalk and our lineups come together a little bit more. So use code FantasyFling at DFS Army for 10% off of VIP subscription. This domination station, I tell you guys, by like Friday, it's ready to roll. We have projected ownership. You can build lineups, you can stack, you can do all the things for the baller. Yahoo's big contest, you can target all those things. So make sure you're a DFS Army subscriber. DFSArmy.com, FantasyFling, 10% off VIP subscription. I hope you guys have a great week and make some money. We'll see you next week.